All right, welcome back. We've got a lot for you today. But first, a few announcements. C2 evaluations, fill us out when you're able to. Please do get to them before it's too late. We really value your feedback about this course. Your tutors value your feedback about them. We read it all. We make adjustments in light of it. You've got an essay coming up. Don't delay too much on that. Takes time to write a good essay. Looks like everyone's sitting near someone, which is good because you have things to discuss, or you will shortly. And lastly, we've not made it visible yet. We will put it up soon, the sample exam. There will be no surprises. We're going to give you a set of essay questions. If you're able to answer all of them well, you'll be prepared for the exam. Yeah, so that'll be up soon. All right. So first of all, I just want to remind you about what we're doing in trying to answer the question, what is knowledge? We're engaged in conceptual analysis. And one thing that you may have found funny up to this point is the fact that we started with this question, what is knowledge? And we've gone about answering it in a way that you wouldn't typically answer questions in other departments. Right? If you were in a physics department or a biology department and you were asked to answer some question of physics or biology, you wouldn't think you could arrive at a correct answer or arrive at a correct answer in a reasonable way by saying, what do you think? What do I think? Right? That's not how you answer scientific questions, typically. So why is it okay here? Well, it's okay here because our question is about a concept. And it's a concept you all possess. You don't get to be a competent user of the English language in our society without getting really familiar with how to correctly use the word knowledge. Knowledge is one of the 10 most commonly used words in the English language. You're all really good at using it. What does that mean? It means that you're really good at detecting when it applies and detecting when it does not apply. Now, that doesn't mean in all possible cases you can think of, it'll be clear to you whether or not there's knowledge or not. But what it does mean is that there is a substantial range of cases where you can just tell whether or not a person has knowledge and whether or not they don't. And it's the fact that you have this skill, this competence with the term knowledge, that makes this process of thinking about hypothetical cases a useful way to go about providing explicit conditions for when knowledge obtains. That's my spiel. Any questions about that? Does that kind of make sense? Right, it's important that you understand why this is an okay way to do inquiry for this question. Right? This isn't an okay way to answer the question, is the Earth round? What do you think? No, that's not how you come to a reasonable view about that. But what is knowledge? This is okay. Or at least what is our concept of knowledge? All right, so last time we saw that Nozick's account of knowledge did work that earlier accounts of knowledge did not do. So notably, condition 3 of Nozick's account rules out some standard Gettier cases. Just because the Walt and the coin case is a mouthful, I'm probably just going to stick to the sheep case. But if you have questions about the Walt case, I can rephrase everything with regard to that. But so think about condition 3. If P were not true, then S would not believe P. And your belief that a sheep is in the field in the hypothetical scenario where you're traveling through the country, you see a very sheep-like thing in a field, but it's a sheepdog, so you're not actually seeing a sheep. Though beyond your range of vision in the field, there are sheep. So you have a true belief, but you don't have knowledge. Right? You don't see the sheep. Condition 3 is supposed to explain why you don't have knowledge. If P were not true, that is in this case, if there were no sheep in the field, you would not believe P. That condition has to hold in order for you to have knowledge that sheep are in the field. But in the sheep case, it doesn't hold, right? You would believe sheep are in the field even if there were no sheep in the field. Why? Because you're forming your belief on the basis of your visual experience of the sheepdog, right? Not the sheep. So even if the sheep that are beyond your range of vision migrated to the next field, you'd still believe sheep are in the field because you're believing on the basis of your visual experience of the sheepdog. Right? So condition 3 says this is not a case of knowledge. Condition 3 is also what says the case of Walt and the coins. It's not a case of knowledge. Any questions about how this condition applies and is useful here? All right, good. That means your memory is serving you well from last lecture. I hope. All right. Why have the fourth condition then? Well, the fourth condition is needed to rule out some other cases, like the brain lesion case. In this brain lesion case, you've got an individual who has a lesion on their brain that just affects their brain and their mind in various ways. Sometimes it causes them to hallucinate. Sometimes it causes them to feel happy. Sometimes it causes them to feel sad. Sometimes it causes them to have specific beliefs. And on one occasion, this guy Max is caused to have the belief that he has a brain lesion. Now let's see if, first question, is that a case of knowledge? Well, as we discussed last time, it seems really weird to consider that to be a case of knowledge. If a belief just comes to you without any reasons whatsoever that happens to be true, counting it as knowledge, doesn't seem like it. So we want our theory of knowledge to predict that that's not a case of knowing. So we ask if the conditions obtain. As it turns out, conditions 1 through 3 obtain, as we discussed last time. But it's condition 4 that rules out this case as a case of knowledge. Right, so condition 4 says if P were true, then S would believe P. That is, if it were true that you had this brain lesion, you would believe that you had this brain lesion. Now, as we discussed last time, that's false. It's not true in this case that if you had this brain lesion, you would believe it. Rather, what's true is that if you had this brain lesion, you might believe it, that is that you had the lesion, but you also might not believe it. Why might not? Well, because the lesion affects your mind in different ways. Like, sometimes it makes you feel happy, sometimes it makes you feel sad, right? Sometimes you hallucinate, sometimes it makes you form beliefs, and it just so happens that the belief it brings about is a true belief, but it might not have brought about that true belief. So it can't be true that if you were to have the lesion, you would believe it, if it's also true that if you were to have the lesion, you might not believe it. Are you guys with me? All right, this is just all review from last time. Any questions? It is tricky. Right? I don't expect this to be perspicuous upon first encounter or even second encounter. So questions are good here. All right, well, absence of questions, I'll take for understanding. All right, let's move on. Okay. Think about another brain lesion case. All right, this is a special brain lesion. Max has developed this special brain lesion. It has just one effect on the mind, though. It makes Max believe he has a brain lesion. In fact, it's impossible to have this particular brain lesion without believing that you have it. All right. So why don't you turn to the person next to you, or a person nearest to you anyway. Is condition 4 satisfied in this variation of the brain lesion case? Go ahead. All right, so let's see where you're at. I think this should have been a softball. Maybe I let you have too much time on it. Are all the conditions for knowledge satisfied in this particular case? Or more specifically, is condition 4 satisfied? Yeah, it is. Right? Condition 4 says if P were true, S would believe P. Here that means if Max were to have this lesion, he would believe that he has this lesion. Yeah, that has to be true, given the nature of the lesion. The lesion makes it such that you can't have it and fail to have the belief. So if you have the lesion, you have the belief. Right? In other words, it's not true that you might not have the belief were you to have the lesion. Now look, the other 3 conditions are also satisfied. In this case, it's true that Max has the lesion, right? Condition 1. Condition 2, Max believes he has the lesion. And condition 3, if Max were not to have the lesion, he would not believe it. Right? That's also true. People don't ordinarily form beliefs that they have a lesion. Now maybe Max is a hypochondriac, and he just believes he has weird diseases. If Max were like that, then condition 3 would not be satisfied. But we're just supposing Max is a normal guy, a guy like you, a guy like me, or a person. And he just doesn't form beliefs that he has strange diseases, randomly, like the belief that he has a special lesion. Okay, so all 4 conditions are satisfied. So since all 4 conditions are satisfied, according to Nozick's tracking account, what? Max has knowledge, yeah. But clearly he doesn't, right? If he didn't have knowledge in the original lesion case, he surely doesn't have it now, right? There's been no significant change to warrant a reversal on the question of whether or not he has knowledge. Mm-hmm.
I just have a bit of trouble with the fact that you can manipulate 3. If he's there's a situation where 3 is not true. So in using this as a theory of knowledge, it's not airtight kind of thing. You want your theories to be always, if P were not true, then S would not believe P. But there's a situation in which he would believe that he has a brain lesion, even if he doesn't.
Yeah, so, we just have to recognize the fact that different situations are different situations. And we shouldn't assume that if a condition holds in one case, it has to hold in all other cases. So when I introduce the case of Max the hypochondriac, I've changed cases, right? And we shouldn't assume that just because a condition holds in normal Max case, that it holds in Max hypochondriac case, right? So I don't think that should be a concern. Does that make sense?
Sort of. I guess I just want a condition for knowledge that you can't go against.
Well, this purports to be a definition of knowledge that is true in all cases of knowledge. Every case of knowledge, according to this view, is a case that satisfies these 4 conditions. It's just that in the case of the hypochondriac, we have a different case. And incidentally, it's not a case of knowledge, right? We have no inclination to think that just because someone's a hypochondriac, they have knowledge. In fact, we normally would expect a hypochondriac to be lacking knowledge. Otherwise, we'd view them as differently. There's a sense of irrationality that goes with the notion of hypochondriac, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, what you said is quite correct. I've not gotten into possible worlds analyses of counterfactual claims because it's just a bit much to take on in adequate detail to make possible worlds analyses useful to us all with such a short introductory course. But that is a more extended response. So if it made sense, great. If not, yeah, don't worry about it. All right. Here's a couple different cases, right? So don't think Lesion cases anymore. This is something entirely different. All right, so Ernie and the rubbish bag chute. Ernie deposits rubbish, a rubbish bag into the rubbish chute in his high-rise flat. He has every reason to think the chute is working correctly, and so believes a few minutes later that the rubbish is in the basement. His belief is true. The rubbish really is in the basement. When I say he has every reason to believe, I mean, right, he knows how rubbish chutes work. He's checked, let's assume like he's cared about this. So he's checked before to see if his garbage has made it, and down to the basement. It has every time he's checked. Right, he has no reason to think anything funny is going on. All right, so here's a question. Does Ernie know that the rubbish is in the basement? Hold the thought. There's a different case. Roger places a piece of uranium on a photographic plate and discovers that the plate has become fogged. He repeats the experiment many times. After numerous trials, he puts a piece of uranium on the plate, goes away, and returns sometime later. But before seeing the plate after arriving, he believes that the plate is fogged. And it is actually fogged. So here's another question, right? Much like this earlier one. Does Roger know that the plate is fogged prior to looking at the plate? I want to turn the person next to you, register your thoughts. Do you think these are cases of knowledge? All right, so would you raise your hand if you're inclined to think that there's knowledge in these cases? All right, a few of you. Most of you aren't comfortable. Will some of you articulate why you're not comfortable? Yeah.
The actual truth of the event is not related to the belief. You could have this belief before the event has actually happened. So you could believe that the rubbish would end up in the basement before it was in the basement. So that both the subjective condition is...
Okay. So, so you want to say this is not a case of knowledge according to Nozick's account.
According to Nozick's account, yeah.
Okay, so let me clarify. You're right about that. I didn't want you to ask the question, so maybe I didn't ask this ideally. Is this knowledge according to Nozick's account? Right? It's not knowledge according to Nozick's account. I'm just asking you about your view. Right? Do you think that this is a case of knowledge? So let me just clarify that. Are you inclined to think that this is a case of knowledge, irrespective of Nozick? All right, so it seems like we have our earlier hesitation. Why don't you want to claim that this is knowledge? I want to claim that this is knowledge. Why don't you? Yeah, in the back.
Because I feel like there's an element of sort of guesswork, I suppose, involved. Make a really good point that they could have put something that wasn't uranium on the plate, so it might not have made the print. So in a way, it was like a best guess that it would have, but it wasn't actually necessarily completely true. I mean, if you assume that he did all of those things, then yes, he's right to believe it. But I feel like it's sort of a bit like saying he was kind of lucky in a way. There's an element of luck. He could have been wrong.
Okay. Let me just see if, so this is the most typical reason people get cagey when I ask this question. Is there knowledge in these cases? And it has to do with, you've been thinking about epistemology a little too long, and you're thinking possibility of error. And that seems to be scuttling. So do you feel like your worry is that you can easily imagine things going wrong? Right? Is that the concern? So a lot of you are nodding yes. Yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah, we were saying that we didn't feel comfortable saying with knowledge because both the cases like second degrees or inductive, if it was an argument, that would be an inductive argument, so we don't feel comfortable because it's like most of the time if it happens, then yeah, there's always that chance that it would have.
Okay. So what I'd like you all to appreciate is that this kind of risk that you're all thinking about right now, it's a risk that's present in general. So you believe that there's a chair in front of you, unless you're in the front row, then you believe there's no chair in front of you. Why do you believe that? Because you have a visual experience as of a chair. You could be wrong about that, right? Couldn't you be in the matrix? Right? Isn't that broadly possible? But still, that seems like a far-off scenario, right? That doesn't really seem to worry us ordinarily. You know there's a chair, even though there's a risk you're wrong. Or how about this? Will the sun rise tomorrow? Right? Yeah, it will. Do you know this? I think you do. I think I do. Why? Well, look, in the course of my life, every morning, the sun has risen. I have no reason to think anything different's going to happen tomorrow. Like tonight, it's not a special day, it's not a special night. Things are going to happen as they, or at least I have no reason to think things aren't going to happen as they always have. Could I be wrong? Yeah, in some broad sense, I could be wrong. Maybe aliens will come to our solar system and destroy our sun. But that's vastly unlikely, at least as unlikely as the matrix hypothesis. Now let's think about the uranium case. Yeah, sometimes people make mistakes when they put uranium on plates and walk away. But this is a guy who's done this a whole lot, right? He's a lab rat, right? This is his job. And he's good at his job. He knows where the uranium is. He puts the uranium on the plate and walks off, right? Yeah, someone could be messing with him, but it's unlikely in a laboratory setting where that would be an egregious violation of laboratory ethics to mess with someone by switching the uranium with the plutonium or something. I don't know what you might switch uranium with, but right. So I would encourage you to think that there is knowledge in these cases. Yeah. What was that? So it sounds like So you're wanting to make a distinction between two kinds of knowledge, like everyday knowledge and like super special knowledge.
Well, not necessarily, but like if we're, I mean, the whole study here is like trying to understand what is it that precisely we know and can't like vouch, right? Or like broadly. I mean, I'm fine to say, sure, I think I know, I think I know, like that the rubbish will fall to the basement or whatever. But I don't know that it's fine to just make that leap and then equate it to,
So one way to make the distinction between these two kinds of knowledge, if you will, is not as a difference between kinds of knowledge but kinds of justification. Right? Some things we should be more certain of than others. You should be really certain that you're presently thinking. You should be somewhat less certain that the person next to you is presently thinking. But maybe just somewhat. You should be pretty confident that World War III isn't going to erupt tomorrow. But maybe somewhat less confident than you are in the fact that you're now thinking. Right? You should be very confident in the fact that you're now thinking. You should be pretty confident World War III is not happening tomorrow. We can distinguish knowledge along these lines, degrees of certainty or justification. But they're knowledge all the same. Right? All are knowledge, but some have a greater degree of certainty attached. But our question is, what do all these kinds of knowledge have in common? And that's what these conditions, well, the Nozick's conditions and the other conditions are supposed to spell out, what all those kinds of knowledge have in common. One last comment. Yeah.
So we're taking the condition of certainty away from knowledge.
Yeah. Well, at least hold that.
Would that be opinion? Wouldn't that be just any
Right.
thought?
Yeah. Well, here's the thought. Right. So Descartes wanted knowledge of things about which you could not doubt. But if you hold to such a high standard, say there's no knowledge unless it's impossible to be mistaken. If you make that claim, then you know next to nothing. Right? You can't know that there's a chair in front of you. You can't know that somebody's speaking to you. You can't know that you'll have coffee later in the day, or tea, or whatever you drink, water, some liquid. Right? You will consume something later in the day. You can't know that. If absolute certainty is what's required for knowledge, then the ordinary thoughts you have about what you know and what other people know is just always going to be mistaken, with the exception of maybe cases like I'm now having thoughts and I'm now feeling pain, when you're actually feeling pain, and so on.
My question is, what's wrong with that?
Oh, besides that it's false? No. So we'll talk about this more next week when we talk about skepticism. So this is the skeptical worry. The skeptical worry says, I can imagine myself wrong about a whole lot. So maybe everything I can imagine myself being wrong about, I just don't know. Right? That's the skeptical worry. So we'll return to this. And I'm being, facetious. But I think this, let's just start with our ordinary common sense point of view that says we know a fair bit. We'll put pressure on the view next week, but the common sense view would say that kind of strident skepticism is false. All right. Okay, so I want you to, if you're not convinced yet, at least pretend like you're convinced that there's knowledge in these cases, right? You know, or at least the individual in the fogged plate case knows that the plate is fogged. The individual in the rubbish chute case knows that the rubbish is in the basement. Nozick's theory says this is not knowledge. Which condition fails? Yeah, it's condition 3, exactly. All right, if it were not true, S would not believe it. Right, that conditional is not satisfied. Take the fogged plate case. If P were not true, that is, if the plate were not fogged, S would not believe it. Right, that's not true. S would still believe it. Why? Well, first of all, we have to think about a situation in which P is not true, a situation in which the plate is not fogged. Well, what kind of situation would that be? Well, this would be a situation, a very unusual one, where someone's playing a joke in the lab, right? We're assuming this guy's in a serious laboratory where practical jokes don't take place. And so maybe anti-fog spray is put on the plate, or maybe the uranium's switched with some other visually indistinguishable substance. I don't know. Pick the case you like. If something like that were to be the case, then the plate would not be fogged. But S would still believe it because they wouldn't be aware that a practical joke has been played on them. Right? So they'd still have the belief even though the belief is false. P is not true. All right, so that's the worry. Any questions about condition 3? Why this is the condition that's not satisfied in these cases? Notice that it's condition 3 that causes problem for all inductive knowledge. That the sun will rise tomorrow, that you will have coffee later today. Right, we can just go on and on with examples. It's condition 3 that's going to say, you don't know any of this stuff. Right. So that's a problem. Right. So we've been at it for a bit. We've not yet gotten an adequate account of knowledge. Yeah. So the truth condition says that that can't be the case. It's either true that you will have coffee in an hour or false. Now, if you aren't going to have coffee an hour because you're delayed, then it's just false now that you will have coffee later. And since knowledge requires truth, that can't be a case of knowledge. So I think my response to your question is going to be the same response I gave moments ago to the question you just referenced, that we have this practice of applying the term knowledge to a range of cases in everyday, ordinary circumstances. And what we want to know is what makes these knowledge claims true. What conditions have to obtain if these are to be true. You're right that the underlying assumption, well, let me just finish answering your question. So the underlying assumption is that there is one set of conditions that specifies for all of the cases what it takes to have knowledge. Now, maybe that's false. So maybe at the end of the day, we have to say there's knowledge 1 and knowledge 2, and they're different conditions. But that's a place to end up, maybe not a place to begin. And so we're seeing how far we can get now with the assumption that there just is one concept of knowledge that we're applying to all these cases. Now, we don't have to say that all the cases are exactly the same, right? They might differ in degree of justification, degree of belief, that sort of thing. And I feel like the appeal to this idea that there are different kinds of knowledge is an appeal to differing degrees of justification. But again, this is just a place to begin and see how far we get. All right. So I've had you thinking about what's called, so condition 3 is called a sensitivity condition. This is just for bookkeeping. Don't worry about why we call it a sensitivity condition. If P were not true, S would not believe P. That condition does good work because it rules out Gettier cases, has some problems because it rules out cases of everyday knowledge, right? The fog plate case, the rubber chute case. Because of this, philosophers have turned things around a little bit and said, Here's a different yet related condition that does just the work we need. It's called a safety condition. It says if S were to believe P, on the basis that S actually does believe P, S's belief would be true. All right, so sensitivity says if P were not true, S would not believe P. Safety, and again, don't worry about the terms safety, they're just for bookkeeping. But if you want to find out more, these are the terms you Google. If S were to believe P, S's belief would be true. All right. So first off, notice that this rules out the Gettier cases. So think about the sheep case. On what basis do you believe sheep are in the field? Well, on the basis of your visual experience of the sheepdog. Is it true that if you were to believe P on that basis, it would be true in those circumstances? And the answer is no, it's not. If you were to believe P on the same basis, you might be wrong. Because the basis of your belief is the visual experience of the sheepdog, right? Not the sheep. So you might be right? You might end up with a true belief, but you might not. And because you might not, it's not true that if you were to believe P on that basis, your belief would be true. You see it? These are tricky. All right. Benefit. Not a problem, a benefit. This allows inductive knowledge. This allows inductive knowledge. So think about the fogged plate case. If, I forget the name of the individual, but if the individual lab were to believe that the plate is fogged, on the basis of the fact that he put uranium on a plate, which he's done so many times before, and every time before it's been fogged, right? His belief would be true. Right? Things would have to be really weird for that belief not to be true. Yes, we can imagine unusual scenarios that obtain in which that's not the case, right? Someone's fussing about in the lab. But again, we're supposing that that's not the case, that this is a serious lab in which practical jokes like that do not occur. So if this individual were to believe that the plate is fogged on the basis that he put uranium on a plate and he knows how those two things interact, that belief would be true, right? That it is fogged. All right, how are you guys with this? A few more? All right. So the rubbish chute case. So on what basis does the individual, Ronnie, I think his name was, Ronnie in the rubbish chute case, believe that the rubbish is in the basement? Well, he believes it's in the basement because he knows how rubbish chutes work. He has every reason to think his rubbish chute is working normally. And since it's always worked normally in the past, rubbish goes in, ends up in the basement. Rubbish goes in, ends up in the basement. Rubbish goes in, ends up in the basement. He puts the rubbish in, walks away. That's the basis on which he believes his rubbish is now in the basement. Right. So if he were to believe that his rubbish is in the basement on the basis of the fact that he just put it in the chute that he knows has always worked in the past, would that belief be true? Yeah, so long as everything's normal, right? We're just assuming that life, or not life, but the general situation in which this person's putting the rubbish in the chute is a normal situation. Nothing funny is going on. And if that's the case, then he would end up having a true belief, right? Because if nothing funny is going on, the rubbish ends up in the basement. Yeah.
Isn't this condition just saying if they have a true belief, they have a true belief? Because we've just basically excluded anything going wrong. So just like cheating and saying if they believe it for good reasons and all those reasons are right and true, then they're right. Just because like you're just guaranteeing that they
So it only entails that the belief, so only on the assumption that the basis on which one believes something can't ever be a mistaken basis. This allows for there being mistaken bases. But here's the thing. If you're in a situation where you have a mistaken basis, you're going to end up with a false belief. So you're not going to have knowledge, but for a different reason. The truth condition is not going to obtain. Yeah.
I ask you a question with my example that I made up.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Can you imagine that you are a scientist that you are going to create an airplane in history. And at that moment, there's no airplane at all. You want to create. And you ran through the experiment hundreds of times. And those hundreds of times experiments all fails. And I can say that you have the inductive knowledge that you believe the next experiment it's gonna be failed.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, you did it because you believe you're gonna make an airplane in the future. How can you have the two opposite beliefs at the same time?
Yeah, so if you're wrong, right, if the next experiment, if the next plane construction or whatever does in fact succeed, then your belief that it would not succeed would be a false belief. And false beliefs are not candidates for knowledge. Only true beliefs are candidates for knowledge. Right, so this couldn't be conceived of a case of knowing unless you go back on the truth constraint, the factivity of knowledge. And that's something we're wanting to hold fixed. Yeah. I'd be happy to talk more with you about that after class. Now, so here's supposed to be the benefit, right, that it rules out Gettier cases, doesn't rule out inductive knowledge. But think about all right, so I know this is starting to feel like a futile exercise, but don't worry, we're going to get somewhere. With the safety condition. I haven't just introduced this to brush it aside. But notice the safety condition does have this one worry. Remember the special brain lesion? You can't have this brain lesion without believing that you have it. Well, if you were to believe that you have this lesion on the basis on which you do, so in this case, you believe you have the lesion because the lesion's causing you to have the belief. Right, this is the basis on which you have your belief. Right? You've got the lesion, and it's bringing about the belief. So if you were to believe you have a lesion on the basis of the because you have the lesion causing you to have the belief, then obviously it's going to be true. Right? Because if it's the lesion that's causing you to have the belief, if the lesion is your basis for the belief, then you have the lesion, right? Because the lesion is the basis of your belief. Right? It's what's bringing about your belief. And so you're going to get a situation in which the safety condition is satisfied, and you have a true belief, but it's not knowledge, right? This is, again, lesion cases are not cases of knowing. So the lesion trouble, the lesion problem that was problematic for Nozick is also problematic. Nozick's sensitivity condition is also a problem for the safety condition. All right. So, I don't have time enough to say what I want to say. I'll talk more about it in the next lecture. But, yeah, so the safety condition is going to be important. We'll get back to it next lecture. We're going to do a patch job. We're going to have something that gets us what we want. Before I let you go, don't start packing up. I shouldn't have announced that I'm about to let you go. But any other questions you'd like to ask about these counterfactual conditions? Yeah.
So is it essentially saying that if the justification is true for a true belief, then it's knowledge? If the justification is true.
And when you say it basically...
Safety condition.
Yeah, you're right. So if the basis of the belief ensures that the belief is true, then you're going to always have the safety condition satisfied. Yeah, but here's the funny thing: in the case of the lesion, it's not really clear that you actually have justification at all. All you have is something that's bringing about a belief, but not something that counts as a reason for believing. Right? Not something that makes it rational for you to believe that you have a lesion. So this is a bit different than saying that your source of justification ensures the truth of what's believed. The lesion case is a case where the source of your belief, not the source of your justification, the source of your belief is what ensures the truth of what's believed. Right? So in cases where you have justification plus this kind of truth insurance, right? So this would be a case where thinking that you're now thinking. This would be a case where your introspective awareness of the fact that you're thinking is going to justify you and also ensure the truth that you are thinking. So the safety condition will always be satisfied in that kind of case, introspective case. But in the lesion case, there's no sense of justification. It's just wildly irrational to end up with a belief that you have a lesion when there's nothing that counts as a reason for having it. All you have is a cause, not a source of rationality or justification. All right, so we're just about there. Just a few thoughts left. I didn't think we'd talk this much during lecture, but I'm glad we did. And then next week, we're going to set this aside because we're going to end up with something that's pretty good. And then we're going to talk about, do we have knowledge at all? Now that we've arrived at a reasonable view about what knowledge is, why think we have any? Are the skeptical thoughts really correct? We know next to nothing. That's the task of next week. So, yeah. Just let me eject mine.
Like where
Not that we don't know
need to
this,
change
but
our way of talking
we know
about
that it's incredibly probable. Like, we know that it's
Believing you will fail. So if you think that knowledge requires truth, then believing you will fail cannot be a belief as an act of knowledge. It's a false belief. Yeah. So let me just say this maybe a bit differently. Suppose, right, as we have been, as we argued initially, in order to know something, it has to be true. If you know there's a chair in the room, it has to be true that there's a chair. If you know that you're talking to someone, it has to be true that you're talking to someone. Take the belief that you will fail to make your mind. Can that be knowledge? If knowledge requires truth, and you actually succeed. So if you succeed, and you do not fail, then the belief that you will fail is a false belief.
Yes. But what if the previous, all the previous experiments?
So here's what you have. You have justification. Right? You've got, it's rational for you to believe you will fail, or at least it's likely that you will fail. Right? Because you've got great evidence.
hold the thought. 1 second.
Yeah.
Take her question. And you want to just go into the hallway?